Want to begin? And just to let you know, obviously, our meeting is being recorded. I will ask if everyone, and it looks like everyone has, but if you could please mute your line just so there's no noise distraction, that would be great. And you can leave your cameras on if you prefer, or you can shut your camera off. And if you have a question later on, we can also turn it on at that point. So, just by way of introduction, my name's Margaret Brigley, and I am the CEO and partner at Narrative Research. Narrative Research is a national market research company. We're headquartered in Halifax. We've been here for more than 45 years, and absolutely thrilled to have been able to work with the region on this really important study. I'm here today with Lynn Gillis, who is a senior consultant from Narrative Research, and both her and I worked closely on this project. As I share some findings and results with you today, Lynn will be interjecting just to provide further details and insights from the data tables as we go through the presentation. So I will mention if you're able to hold questions to the end, that would be great. And we've certainly allotted enough time to ensure that any of your questions will be able to respond to that after the presentation. So we're here today to share results of a 2023 U.S. consumer study. And just before I start that, I want to provide a little context for this study. All of you are very well aware that tourism is a key driver and a vital component of economic growth in Atlantic Canada, and especially in Newfoundland and Labrador. And our region has been profoundly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and especially the tourism sector. With the pandemic having reached the end of its third year, last summer, this study was commissioned, and today I'm going to be sharing again the results of this study. I do want to mention before we begin, though, that this project has been made possible through funding provided by the Atlantic Canada Agreement on Tourism, or ACAT. And that's a 9-member pan-Atlantic initiative that's comprised of Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, or COA, the 4 Atlantic Canada Tourism Industry Associations, and also the 4 provincial departments responsible for tourism. So I wanted to provide that context for our study and the presentation today. So I'll just begin by sharing a little bit of information on the research methodology of the study that I'll be sharing results on. This was an online survey, and it intentionally included 2 audiences, namely travelers from the Mid-Atlantic and New England regions of the United States. I appreciate that for many of you, target markets may be elsewhere, but this study specifically focused on those 2 markets. Just for clarity, when I talk about Mid-Atlantic, the Mid-Atlantic would include New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And the New England region would include Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Vermont, and Rhode Island. So just to clarify that. So this study included about 2,400 travelers, and we split those between the 2 markets, so Mid-Atlantic and New England. And the data collection days were, this was conducted in the summer, end of July to the 1st of August. So just to give you a sense of when it was conducted. The survey was pretty detailed. We asked about travel intentions and behaviors, travel planning, and we also shared information on advertising for each of the 4 Atlantic regions. So the average survey completion time was 22 minutes. Now, there were about 10 to 12 different objectives, but at a very high level, 3 broad objectives would really summarize what we were looking to do. We wanted to understand the factors that impact the way Americans travel. And this is especially the case now and going forward post-pandemic. We wanted to gain an insight on how these factors may continue to impact travel intentions and their behaviors, and also their destination choices in the short term. So, how things will look in the next 2 years. And also assess visitor market potential for each of these two regions, for the region, and for Newfoundland and Labrador specifically. As I mentioned as well, we did share advertising for each of the four regions. So we wanted to explore destination appeal for each of the regions and get reactions to the ads for each. Now, this wasn't just a random survey that was sent out to anybody. They had to pre-qualify by meeting a few characteristics. First and foremost, everyone had to hold a valid passport. We wanted to make sure that it was someone that could actually visit Canada. And they had to have taken at least one vacation trip of at least 2 nights outside their home state during the past 3 years, with at least one of the nights spent during that trip being in paid accommodations. So not just to family, friends, or cottages. And or rather, if they hadn't taken such a trip in the last 3 years, they had to have definite plans to take such a trip over the next year. So in essence, we pre-qualified these respondents a bit to make sure that they were people who could travel to Canada and actually did or had a desire to travel outside their home state. We did not set quotas in place for age, gender, or within region. We obviously collected that profiling information, but we didn't force it to meet a certain age group. So this survey, again, covered off travel activities. It covers off things like factors that are important or impacting their decision of where they're going to go, travel intentions, as well as planning for travel, and then advertising reactions. So I'm going to walk through each of those, but we'll start with travel activities. What we saw from this group is that the vast majority, almost everybody, 94%, have taken an out-of-state vacation trip in the past 3 years. Now, keep in mind, they had to, we applied those screening criteria, but 94% had taken an out-of-state trip in the last 3 years. And when we look at the number of separate vacations taken recently, across demographics, on average, we saw about 4 to 5 trips had been taken in the last 3 years. One interesting point here is that, and not surprising, those with a higher household income were more likely to have taken more trips. So not a surprise there. What we see when we look at travelers in these two markets is that domestic travel is most common. In essence, they like to stay within their own country most often. So you can see here, 3/4, 74% of all the travelers said that in recent years they've traveled within the United States. That compares to just under 3 in 10 who have visited the Caribbean or Bermuda, 1/4 who have visited Canada, 22% Europe, and just over 10% Mexico. Those who have, and I will add as well that older travelers are more likely to have visited or traveled within the United States. Now, when we look at their travel within the United States, there's some interesting insights here. Namely, the top U.S. destinations primarily include Florida, followed by New York, Maine, California, New Hampshire, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. So you can see for many, staying close is, or trips that are close are key here. And I mentioned that 1/4 of U.S. travelers had visited Canada in the past 3 years. What's interesting here is when we talk about where they visited in Canada, not surprisingly, the most often mentioned were Ontario and Quebec. In fact, we saw that 44% of those who had visited Canada had actually visited Ontario, and 37% had visited Quebec. One thing that I'll mention, which is a theme that you'll hear a little bit of as I go through these results, is proximity seems to make a difference. And this is also reflected when they visit Ontario and Quebec. Those in Mid-Atlantic are more likely to visit Ontario. Those in New England are more likely to visit Quebec. But let's talk about who visited the Atlantic region. And of those who visited Canada, 13% went to New Brunswick, 13% Nova Scotia, and 9% PEI. And you can see 7% said they had visited Newfoundland and Labrador. When we look at travel activities, Ontario and Quebec, as I mentioned, are the most common provinces that U.S. travelers have visited in the past. But rather than just say, in the last few years, we wanted to know, have they ever visited Atlantic Canada? And here you can see that the percentage increases from that Newfoundland and Labrador percent, that 7%, that bumps up to 16% when you consider if they've ever visited Newfoundland and Labrador. But among non-visitors, we wanted to know if they've ever heard of each Atlantic province, and that varies from 47% to 63%, with Newfoundland and Labrador being on that lower range of the 47% of non-visitors saying they've heard of the Atlantic province. Now, let's talk about awareness and familiarity. When we look at that U.S. market overall, we wanted to understand how aware they are of each Canadian province or territory and how familiar they are. And we see, and there's a lot of information here, once again, we see that awareness and familiarity is highest for Ontario and for Quebec. So the awareness is on the left here. You can see as an example, 85% are aware of Quebec, 84% are aware of Ontario. When we ask them whether or not they're familiar with what there is to see and do in that province, again, familiarity is quite high with Quebec and Ontario at 58% and 56%. Let's have a look at the Atlantic provinces here, and those are highlighted in the green. And here you can see that the bulk of travelers are aware of each Atlantic province, and that would be the columns on the left. So it ranges from 73% in Nova Scotia down to 55% in Newfoundland and Labrador. And familiarity is lower on each account, but in Newfoundland and Labrador, 29% say that they are familiar with what there is to see and do while on vacation in Newfoundland and Labrador. We asked them, and this is those who indicated they are somewhat or very familiar with Newfoundland and Labrador. We asked them what would they expect to see or do when they visited. And what we saw is that there are three key responses here. Nature, sightseeing, and the oceanfront are key expectations of what to do and see in Newfoundland. And I've got a few verbatim comments here that they told us. I'd expect to take scenic drives along the coast and enjoy the local dishes, figgy duff pudding. I would want to experience the unique culture and the hospitality of Newfoundland by visiting charming fishing villages, attending lively local festivals, and enjoying traditional music and cuisine. Visit Grossmore National Park, Cape Spear Lighthouse, and Signal Hill, bird watching, and view icebergs. I would focus on the seacoast of Newfoundland and Labrador. I have seen gorgeous hikes along the coast in TV ads and online ads. Since Newfoundland isn't all that far from Maine, I'd love to take an adventure trip. And then we see visit parks and see amazing wildlife, mostly outdoor activities. Breathtaking landscapes, kayaking, swimming, hiking, and community. Now, we presented a wide range, 25 different items of what they might consider when they're selecting a destination. And we asked them how important each of those factors were when considering or when choosing a destination. And across those wide range of factors, we see that most of them are considered important when they're choosing a vacation destination. But first and foremost, across all, safety is deemed most critically important. So again, across 25 different items, what I'm going to show you here are the 10 factors that were considered most critically important. And when you consider that that importance scale, these were the percentages that said these factors were critically important. 80% said it's critically important that the destination is a safe place to visit. That's followed by being a place where I can enjoy when I travel with friends and family, that it's a place that allows me to de-stress, a place where there are lots of great things to see and do, a place that offers good value for money. These are the bottom 5 of the top 10. And again, 58% said it's critically important to them that this destination has beautiful outdoor scenery and landscapes, has people that are friendly and welcoming, has great local dining and culinary experiences, and is a great place for exploring and soaking in the atmosphere. And finally, half said it's a place that offers a real, authentic experience. So again, these factors were considered critically important when choosing a pleasure destination. And that's important when you think about messaging or the promise about what a place might offer.
These factors as well are consistent regardless if you're talking about New England or the Mid-Atlantic. They're the same, generally the same.
Yeah. So another question that we asked them is we asked them to consider 4 major market areas, namely United States, Europe, Canada, and Mexico. And we asked them which statement best describes their intentions to visit each of those markets for a pleasure trip of 2 or more nights in the next 2 years. Specifically, do they have any interest? Were they dreaming about it or seriously considering visiting or returning there? In what we'd call the net active planning stage, whereby they've actually taken steps to move forward with a vacation in that area. So the gray areas are of no interest or really not top of mind at all. The orange is more thinking about it, and all of the blue reflects a more active planning stage or action. So what you can see here is when you're examining intentions to visit across those 4 major markets, this once again highlights that U.S. travelers have a preference for domestic travel. You can see currently about half of them, that 47%, about half of them are currently in the midst of actively planning a trip within the next 2 years in the United States. So let's look at Canada here, because here you've got 2 in 10, 19%, who say that they are currently in that active planning stage. But importantly, you can see that only 2 in 10, so a similar percent, in fact, have no interest in Canada. So it suggests that certainly Canada is not ruled out by most. But the active planning stage is higher both for the United States and for Europe as well. And we wanted to, we asked specifically, and this just breaks down this graph in a slightly different way. If you think about intentions to visit Canada in the next 2 years, this again reflects the fact that 1/2 of as I mentioned earlier, they've booked or planned a trip within the US. But there are some travelers who are looking to consider Canada as a destination, although there's less active planning in that regard. However, look at all of that blue. And the blue here, I'm talking about folks that would consider or have considered or are actually actively planning a vacation to Canada in the next 2 years. And of those, we asked how likely they were to actually visit each Atlantic Canadian province. And what we see is among all of those who are open to considering visiting Canada, the percent likely to visit each Atlantic province varies from 8% in Newfoundland and Labrador to 19% in Nova Scotia.
The older travelers as well are much more likely to say that they're seriously considering visiting or returning to Canada compared to the younger counterparts.
And we also see that a clear majority of US travelers are likely to consider visiting Atlantic Canada over the next 2 years. So when we ask specifically how likely they are to travel to at least one Atlantic Canadian province, 63% told us in the next 2 years that they're likely to do so. And of those, it varies depending on the number of provinces that they're interested in visiting. 15% said I'd likely go to one, 17% said two, 13% three, and 2 and 10 said all four. However, I would question whether they truly are familiar with how much time that would involve or how much travel that would involve. And one of the things that we asked was when you consider the number of vacation trips that they're going to be taking in the coming year, we wanted to know if it was going to be the same or higher than the previous years. And it appears Canadian travel will remain relatively stable. So there are different types of travel that we asked them about in terms of future intentions. What are your future travel intentions for short trips of 1 to 2 nights, longer trips of 3 or more nights, trips within your state, trips outside your state but within the US, trips to Canada, and trips beyond the US. So here you can see that trips to Canada, we have more than half who say they will be taking more trips or taking the same number of trips. 2 and 10 are saying either they are going to take fewer trips or that they never take those type of trips.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Len.
Oh no, I was just going to say, perhaps unsurprising too, the higher income individuals are much more likely to say that they are more likely to take more trips to Canada than lower income.
Yeah. We also asked, assuming you had a choice of visiting, would you visit Atlantic Canada, Mid-Atlantic, or the New England region if you could only visit one of those? And what we see is that Atlantic Canada and New England are equally preferred as regional destinations for visitors in these markets. So you can see 36% said if they had to choose, they would choose Atlantic Canada versus 37% who would choose New England. Only 18% would choose the Mid-Atlantic. We wanted to know why. Why would they choose Atlantic Canada over New England or Mid-Atlantic? And what we heard is that for the most part, it's not a place they've been, and it's some place they want to go that's new, something that's away from home, and they're more familiar with the other regions, suggesting that they're looking for a new experience or something that they haven't experienced before. So others said, I heard good things. I want to visit a more interesting region. And the scenery, nature, wildlife comes up as does. I like the area and I enjoyed previous visits there. So this really tells us just the insight at a high level that they'd like to go someplace they hadn't been before and experience something that's different from home. of the things that we did in the study is we looked at the US Census figures, namely the population in each of these markets, and then the responses to the various answers, namely, have they visited in the past 3 years, and do they plan to visit in the next 2 years? And we did this so we could look at the potential market, understanding that this is looking at the figures. This would suggest the full potential size of this market based on these results. So you can see that there is a notable market potential for Newfoundland and Labrador visitation across both of these markets, and interest in is certainly similar, but the population within the Mid-Atlantic region is so much larger. It in itself would present a larger potential for you because of that. So we asked about travel planning, and what we saw here is when you consider travel planning, June to September are considered the peak travel months for an Atlantic Canada vacation, and potential visitors expect the planning cycle to last several months. So if you can see this graph here, few points here to mention. The month that they're likely to consider visiting Atlantic Canada, you can see again, it's primarily June, July, August, and September. And when you consider how long they take to plan or to book, you can see the average number of months to plan and research a trip is about 5 months versus the time that they would book it or book ahead would be just under 4 months. So it really shows that the planning and the researching phase is 4 to 5 months, and the booking is usually a 3 to 4 month window. An important point here is results are incredibly consistent across each of the provinces. So it doesn't matter which province they're interested in visiting. It's pretty consistent.
Planning cycles are also very consistent between the New England and Mid-Atlantic markets.
This is an interesting question because we wanted to understand where they turn for information. And we see that travel-related websites and review sites are key sources for information when considering an Atlantic Canadian vacation. The top 5 information sources that were listed, the first one being travel websites, and that's Expedia, Travelocity, or others. Online review sites. So they're looking for what others have experienced and for what others have thought of their trip. Destination sites are key, 4 and 10. And also social media, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, or others. And the advice of friends, family, or word of mouth are key to a third.
Younger travelers are also more likely to use like the online resources, while older travelers are much more likely to indicate like advice on friends and family and the non-online sources.
So, and that's regardless of whether it's the Mid-Atlantic or the New England market. And another really interesting point is how are they planning to travel if they're traveling to Atlantic Canada? And what we heard is that air travel is the most common anticipated mode of transportation to Atlantic Canada for vacation. I found this really interesting because when we look at this air car breakdown, you can see that there's some variance depending on where people are from. Those who are closer are more likely to drive. So if you look at the New England market and those, if they were to visit Newfoundland and Labrador, 31% say of those in New England say they travel by car, but 55% said they'd choose air. Similarly, in the Mid-Atlantic market, the bulk, 64% said they would choose to visit Newfoundland and Labrador by air versus 22% who said that they would drive by car. just some interesting findings and perhaps a little surprising from what I would expect, given that traditionally within this region, we've seen high, a high road trip desire. Regardless of what province they intend to visit, we see that most people, the majority of potential visitors, they tell us they'd use a travel agent or a tour operator to assist with their planning. This could be online assistance too, in booking. But we saw between 55% and 59% said they'd use a travel agent or a tour operator if they were considering Atlantic Canada within the next 2 years. And we asked what they would like or what they would use that service for. Booking air transportation is key. Asking for recommendations of what destinations to visit is another. Booking accommodations and booking a complete package such as transportation, accommodations, meals, etc. To a lesser extent, they're going to rely on some kind of agent or operator service to book a cruise or a ferry or a motor coach. So this really highlights the fact that they're looking for assistance to book either accommodations, where to visit, or transportation. So I mentioned ads, and one thing that we did show for each province was a video advertisement as well as a static image or a banner ad. And so we presented that. Actually, before we presented that, we wanted to know if they had recalled seeing any tourism related ads by destination. And what we saw is that with across those markets, we've got about half who say that yes, they do recall seeing some type of advertising on Atlantic Canada. This varies though, depending on which province you're speaking of. And you can see, and this is, I'm assuming this would be reflective of various media buys, but in the mid-Atlantic area, 43% recalled before being shown anything that they had seen in Newfoundland and Labrador tourism-related ad versus those in New England, 35% said they had. Now, when you consider the mediums that they recall seeing or hearing ads on, it's a range. So 2 in 10 said TV, a similar percent said social media of some kind, and 19% just recalled seeing the advertising online in general, non-specific. So they didn't cite the site. So then what we did is we presented for each province, and I'll just be sharing with you the information on Newfoundland and Labrador, but we shared a video, a 30-second ad video, as well as a printed copy of the banner ad. And what we saw is that these ads hold broad appeal, and the bulk of U.S. travelers, they felt the ads actually encouraged them to visit the province. So 3/4 considered the ads to be appealing, and 67% or 2/3 said the ads, after seeing them, motivate them to travel to Newfoundland and Labrador. And we asked to what extent they agree or disagree with specific statements in relation to the ads. And again, the ad campaign scored very positively. 2/3 said they include things of interest to me. They make me want to find out more about Newfoundland and Labrador, want to visit Newfoundland and Labrador, and they tell me you can do and see things in Newfoundland and Labrador that you can't elsewhere. So really speaking to that differentiation. So positive results. Importantly, the advertising positively influences travel intentions to Newfoundland and Labrador. So after seeing the ads, 44% told us that they're likely to take a pleasure trip to Newfoundland and Labrador at some point. And that versus the 8% of who indicated a likelihood of visitation before seeing any of the ads. So again, it really reinforces that obviously there would be many other factors to consider in terms of where else they're going, but it definitely positively positions Newfoundland and Labrador as a destination of choice or a destination they'd like to see. After seeing the ads for all 4 Atlantic provinces, we wanted to know in the next 2 years how likely they are to travel to at least one Atlantic Canada province. And that was 68%. So that was actually 63% who, or before seeing any of the ads, 63% said at least one province. And that increased to 68%. One note that's really important here is that Newfoundland and Labrador, obviously, as I mentioned, saw a great pickup in terms of likelihood after seeing the ads. So when we consider all of the results overall, there are a few points that I'd like to just share with you in summary. And the first one is that overall, we clearly see that US travelers, they're open to a wide variety of destination choices, and Atlantic Canada clearly holds appeal to many. So it's a destination that does hold appeal. But proximity plays a key role in destination choice. Those who live closer to Canada are more inclined to visit than those who live even just in the next region. And we also saw past experience clearly makes a difference. Those who have visited Atlantic Canada before, those who have visited a specific province before, are more inclined to visit the region or that province again. It really also shows, especially when you consider the domestic market and the prominence of the top of mind consideration of Ontario and Quebec, that we face collectively tough competition when we're looking at that US market. There are many others, many other destinations of interest. When you consider travel planning, another important point that comes out of this research is that future campaign efforts it suggests they should focus on media buys in early winter and spring months. Keep in mind that if it's that 4-month period to plan a trip or the 3 to 4 month trip to book a trip, that you need to make sure that you're top of mind prior to that planning cycle being already underway. Another important point is differentiation, how that will play a key role in encouraging American travelers in those 2 markets to select an Atlantic Canada pleasure trip over other destinations. We saw that they want something that's different from home, something that is going to be showing them something or letting them experience or taste something that they can't locally. So they've got to have a clear reason why to go the extra distance. Also, affordability. We know that looking for value for money is important to them. And here's a real opportunity, obviously, when you consider the Canadian US dollar exchange rates right now. And the final point here, which was something perhaps a little surprising to me, which may be a post-COVID consideration, I don't know, but the fact that air access is so important as a mode of travel if they're looking to consider traveling to Atlantic Canada. And this really suggests that easy air travel access solutions are needed to meet US travelers' needs. So those are a few highlights from the report. And all that said, I look forward to the questions. So if anyone would like, they can put questions in the chat, or also if you'd like, you can just shout them out or raise your hand. Any surprises, comments, or questions? quiet bunch. I will mention that a copy of the presentation will be posted. Colleen will be posting that. Colleen, any?
Yes, actually, I have in the chat just the URL for where the posting of the recording will be, and also a copy of this deck in PDF format, and that's at acat-etra.ca. So that should be posted later this afternoon or early tomorrow morning. Oh, I see there's a couple of things in the chat here.
Great.
How important is rental vehicles to those that travel by air?
We didn't ask that question specifically, but certainly I think having ready access to rental cars, rental vehicles would be pretty important. But that wasn't something that was asked specifically. Certainly an important consideration. And Brian, I see your comment. You didn't see it. You didn't see a mention of how cost affects American travel. Actually, when we look back, and I'll flip back some of the slides here, when we talked about what was most important, the most important considerations, one of them was cost related. And there we go. So 62% said it's critically important that it offers good value for money. So cost related factor. And for sure, this is where when air is added, it can be an expensive proposition. So I appreciate that's a huge factor in giving travel. Any other comments anyone would like to share? And also, just to echo your comments, Brian, you say you hear it from travelers a lot about how it's expensive to get there, and certainly the region itself has been challenged by many a decline in air access, and that's why that one of the last points that I mentioned is that an air access solution really needs to be readily available so people can travel to the region and within the region as well in a most cost-effective manner. Okay.
Okay, well, if there's no further questions and comments, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today for this presentation. And as I mentioned, the recording and a copy of the deck will be on the website later today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.